Lo siento davvero, después de 5 años en Italia ho casi olvidado todos mis español, quindi I need to talk in English. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commissioner, I would like to present here the first findings of a study of the scientific arm of the European Commission on how to measure aquaculture. We have heard quite a number of arguments already, and we all know that this is an important issue. And I wanted to start to just ask, why do we want to measure? And this is a very simple question, and it's of course politically important to know, because if you do not measure something, you cannot improve it. And this is not something that is attributed to me, but this is something that we know since centuries already, because the quotation comes from Lord Kelvin, and we are going to continue with indicators to just determine the state of the art, to determine where we are in aquaculture at a European level. We know that sometimes very well for certain species at the national level, but we are taking a look at the European level, and indicators can quantify the position of the member states, they can identify trends, and they can support all of us together in making the right decisions. Indicators all alone are a measurement tool, so they need to be analyzed, and they might change over the time, and they're not doing any politics, they're just measuring. Measuring is far better than guessing. And if it is about fish and fisheries, then we all know that guessing is always very complicated. So scientifically and technologically, we want to replace and substitute for this rough guessing and for this gut feeling by something that is far more reasonable, by indicators. And I got the pleasure here to present what we are going to do and what we are going to have in our report. But I would also have a little bit of disclaimer. We do not judge any performance. We just suggest how to measure it. We do not decide if contradicting, objecting targets, for instance, environment and industrial and production targets, should be dealt with this way or that way. We just see where we are. And indicators do not complete the discussion. Indicators start the discussion. It's a first step, and we wanted to better start this discussion at the European level, specifically for aquaculture here. We encountered a number of obstacles, and I would not want to talk too lengthily about them because they are well known. We have scarce data. We have little data, and we have dispersed data. We do not have the very same database across all species, across all sectors, in aquaculture, across all member states. We do not have national GDP accounting that shows a category for aquaculture. We have agriculture and fisheries, but we do not have aquaculture explicitly. We have limited data on prices and markets, and we're having drawbacks and gaps in the data sets. So for the scientists that have the task to pull together indicators, how do you measure something if you have little data that you can work on? And this is complicated, and we did our best, and this is best practice effort from the scientific arm, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, to make a proposal. So the methodology in a quick run, we wanted to create reasonable and aquaculture-specific indicators. Use as much existing data as we can and replace gaps by interviews and understand better by expert interviews where we have missed something out. We wanted to rely on existing production statistics that have longer time series back in time to fill gaps. And on the calculations, We wanted to normalize because the sectors are enormously different, of different size, if we are taking a look at different member states. So we have based the data on the calculations on data from single species, but we have also aggregated later on, I will show you that, into production patterns. The validity of a research piece like that is to be talked about at least briefly. A research and an indicator can be always challenged, and it's not the final truth. But the approach has been reviewed by experts, and we have not done this with a head down in the Scientific Research Center of the European Commission, but we have done that in collaboration with experts and with our kind colleagues of DG Mare, and therefore at least we have a common approach as far as we can so far, and we have quite an okay here. The study itself defines 12 different indicators from different domains. And this slide here is not to be read and understand instantaneously. We have taken a look from the left to the right to economic, social, and environmental dimensions. And we have defined a number of indicators, mostly on the economic side. The definition of the indicators is just quickly mentioned here because it's not self-explanatory. So growth this time is not measured in GDP, but it's measured in production growth and the variation of production of fish stocks. The profitability, the labor productivity definitions deviate a little bit, and they are tailored to the aquaculture sector, so they're not the general macroeconomic terms that we might be used to. Employment, apparent consumption a little bit on the social side, and environmental parameters likewise. This is what we have defined. We have abbreviated them, and I will show you in the second part of the presentation a little bit the first findings from the study that will be published very soon. First findings. For the first time on a, let's say, patchwork but aggregated and European data set, we can differ between the different sectors, freshwater, marine and shellfish. And if you're taking a look at the sectors, you will find that in these centered diagrams, they have different profiles. So you can see a stronger environmental indicator position in the freshwater. This is the blue part at the lower hand side, whereas in shellfish, the environmental indicators are showing smaller values. I am not going to interpret this or to analyze it, because this is a task of the experts and the policymakers. We just wanted to put together a methodology how to just come to a better measurement. You can see again in red the economic indicators, in blue here the environmental, and in green the social indicators. The longer the bar, the more important the value, and we have normalized them to something between 0 and 1. I'm going to go ahead for a number of findings, because I should not have just here a presentation on technology and scientific background, but also a little bit on the results. These values are growth values over the years, so there are values per year. And we can see that from the data that we have on the indicators as they are composed, we're having a slight increase in the marine sector, whereas freshwater is kind of a stagnation, and shellfish is even going down 2.4% per year over the last 5 years. Let's not analyze here. On employment, you can see, if you're taking a look at the lower left-hand diagram, that the green bar, which again is shellfish, seems to have the biggest employment, whereas there's less employment in freshwater and in the marine sector. But if you're taking a look at the right-hand side, you can see that the majority of this employment is in Spain, in France, and a bit in Italy. So these three nations are making up far more than 80% of the total employment at all, only in the shellfish sector. If you then take a look at the total figures, you will find that the figures are enormously small. So we're talking about something, even in shellfish, in the area of 40,000 persons only. So the good news is there must be some potential. But a little bit of water into the wine, the contribution to the employment is local. This is also something that shows up very, very clearly. It is not even regional, it is local. So the ratio of aquaculture jobs in total jobs amounts up to 4.7%, not in certain regions, but in certain places. It is the high figure, 4.7%, so it varies in certain places between 0.5 and 4.7. But if you match aquaculture to total employment, nationwide or Europe-wide, then you are round about at 0.016%, which is really, really small. So we have a small basis to start from, but there are opportunities in there. Then on the space availability, also taking a look, is space really a limiting factor? The findings from satellite observations and satellite imagery, high resolution, and studies that we have incorporated into our study from Greece, Ireland, Spain, and the UK indicate that the hectares occupied are not that much. If you're taking a look at the total space, here you will find that even in Greece, the aquaculture space is only a quarter of Athens airport. So this is also something that brings us to considerations from the expert interviews. Is space limitations by size really a decisive factor? Or isn't it rather finding the right places? And I will come back to that in a second. We have obstacles likewise for aquaculture, and we know them all very well. They have now been statistically analyzed a bit and supported by expert interviews. So the competition for space, of course, can be seen as the competition for the right spaces in the light of what I've just said. Lack of clear priorities is one issue that we should look at, and something that really hampers growth is here the fragmentation of competencies and the difficult procedures in the authorization. Environmental concerns play into that, but again, I'm not going to make a statement here where a preference is supposed to be. It is just a question that is left to the policymakers and the community. We also took a look at the intensity of productions, and this is the last chapter that I would like to present here. You can see, looking into the fish production, the freshwater, marine fish production, the freshwater production, the shellfish, and the RAS systems, that we're having different intensity on capital, on labor, on input. And we also need to think into these different features of different production types, and we need to understand if they can really be regulated by in a uniform way, or if we need to think more specifically. Again, these are all suggestions that we need to take up, but now we got some solid data and we have a proposal for indicators how to measure all these things. On the intensity, let's take a look at the marine fish production, and we have the example here from the only from the UK on marine, which is mainly based on salmon data that we have there. So this is high input and output, and if you take a look at the left-hand side, the production and the labor productivity in the economic red parameters. We got large spikes there, so we feel that there is quite a production, and this is productivity, and also the values that we're having on profitability shows that the marine fish production has a certain degree of profitability. So there is a potential to compete, but also we need to see how, if we want to grow that kind of, that sector of aquaculture, how to overcome the obstacles that we have seen before. If you now take a look at the sectoral picture, which is a little bit different, you see that the freshwater production, and there is an example of Poland, has quite a different idea. I mean, the productivity might be okay, but take a look at the LP indicator that is defining the labor productivity. This is something, low labor productivity, looking completely different from the marine fish picture that we have just seen here. Take a look at the LP position here, and going back one slide, we're here. It's quite a different view. So we're still having a large number of environmental parameters here on the lower edge, which are blue. So that comes to another idea how to integrate the environmental features in a freshwater production, but we need to understand that this is a low labor productivity area. The shellfish production, on the other hand side, is also low labor productivity, but it's labor intensive, and it might contribute to external trade, but as we have seen, the economic figures are not really encouraging. It has gone down a little bit in the past 5 years. So we can now, based on the proposed indicators, split the different segments and take a look at the different economic positions. Finally, the RAS systems, the recirculating aquaculture systems, and we have just taken a look at the Netherlands, where the marine production is completely based on 2 species that are produced in these RAS systems. This, of course, is a very high input. It's a long-term investment, and we know that, but now we can also measure it a bit better, because we do not have to judge from guts feeling. So this is not competing for space, quite a different issue, but we discussed it last night. It's a long-term investment, and the production will not be there overnight. I need to conclude here, also given the idea that I wanted to perhaps save a couple of minutes for question, and that we have a second speaker that has told me that he might have 5, 7 to a maximum 10 minutes altogether. The total study comprises 277 pages. We are just about to finalize it. We didn't want to be so definitive, saying these are now European aquaculture performance indicators, because as scientists we have seen that once out, values are really taken for being the final truth. So probably we might even rethink the title, saying a way towards European aquaculture performance indicators, not having the idea that science has decided it all already. We will liaise with our dear colleagues from DG Mara, of course, to get that out as one voice from the European Commission, and I'm expecting the whole report to be published in the next 1 or 2 weeks. I have carefully, as a scientist, put the end of the year 2012 here, and it will be published at the JRC website. Thank you very much for your attention.